Hey, eighth grade. So today we're going to be focusing on the article called The Blue-Eyed, Brown-Eyed Experiment. But before we do that, I just wanted to review what the research task prompt that we are answering says. So this week you have read three articles discussing bias. And remember that bias is prejudice or when one person takes one particular side over another. We've already read A Teen in a Trolley Reveals Society's Dark Side, and we will read Little Things Are Big. But our focus today is the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. So remember that we are writing an essay analyzing the author's purpose in each article, or why the author wrote the article, what they want the reader to understand. And also we are identifying the way information is presented in each article so that we can compare it across articles. And the way information is presented is usually like through examples, through directly addressing the reader, experiments, eyewitness accounts, all of those things that we've already gone over. So when you get to your blue-eyed, brown-eyed experiment article, go ahead at the top and set your purpose. We're looking for author's purpose while we read, as well as the way information is presented. And your teachers are going to be checking for annotations when you come up front, so make sure that you are annotating your text. After the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in April of 1968, a third grade teacher named Jane Elliott decided to try a social experiment to help her students understand prejudice. So I underlined assassination. That means when a public figure is murdered. So when Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. I underlined experiment because that's one of the ways that authors present information or text structure. And then I underlined prejudice because we know that prejudice is another word for bias. So we don't have an author here. However, we are talking about a third grade teacher named Jane Elliott doing an experiment. So the way that our author is setting us up, or the way information is being presented, is through the experiment of this woman, Jane Elliott. I'm not going to be able to add comments or underline, but while I'm reading, go ahead and make those annotations on your own. On April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. On April 5th, Stephen Armstrong was the first child to arrive in Jane Elliott's third grade classroom in Riceville, Iowa. He immediately asked why that king, referring to Martin Luther King Jr., was murdered. After the rest of the class arrived, Elliott asked what they knew about Black people. She then asked the children if they would like to try an exercise to feel what it would be like to be treated the way a person of color is treated in America. Jane Elliott decided to make the exercise based on eye color instead of skin color, to see what segregation would be like. The children agreed to try the exercise. So here our author is presenting some background information about the experiment that they're going to explain. Remember that it's 1968, so this classroom is going to be full of only white children, and at this time, racism is a huge issue in America. So this experiment is to help these children understand what it's like to be treated the way a Black person is being treated in America while they are alive. They've probably never really interacted with a Black child, and so that's why she needs to do an experiment like this for them to fully understand prejudice and bias. So now our author is going to actually tell us what the experiment, the steps of the experiment. On that first day of the exercise, she designated the blue-eyed children as the superior group, or the better group. Elliott provided brown fabric collars and asked the blue-eyed students to wrap them around the necks of their brown-eyed peers as a method to easily identify the minority group. She gave the blue-eyed children extra privileges, such as second helpings at lunch, access to the new jungle gym, and 5 extra minutes at recess. The blue-eyed children sat in the front of the classroom, and the brown-eyed children were sent to sit in the back rows. The blue-eyed children were encouraged to play only with other blue-eyed children, and to ignore those with brown eyes. Elliott would not allow brown-eyed and blue-eyed children to drink from the same water fountain, and often chastised or publicly punished the brown-eyed students when they did not follow the exercise rules or made mistakes. She often exemplified the differences between the two groups by singling out students and would use negative aspects of brown-eyed children to emphasize a point. So right here, the author has given us what Jane Elliott did to conduct her experiment. And remember, the purpose of the experiment is so that her children understand what it's like to be treated as inferior or less than simply because of eye color. They're really, really trying to explore the prejudice of skin color, but because all of her children are white, she used their eye color as a differentiating factor. So the only reason that the blue-eyed children are getting any extra privileges is just because this teacher is trying to show their students what it's like to live in a place where you're treated differently because of something as simple as the color of your skin or the color of your eyes. At first, there was resistance among the student in the minority group to the idea that blue-eyed children were better than brown-eyed children. To counter this, Eliot lied to the children by stating that the melanin responsible for making children blue-eyed was also linked to their higher intelligence and learning ability. Shortly thereafter, this initial resistance fell away. Those who were deemed superior became arrogant, bossy, and otherwise unpleasant to their inferior classmates. Their grades also improved, doing mathematical and reading tasks that seemed outside their ability before. The inferior classmates also transformed into timid and subservient children who even during recess isolated themselves, including those who had previously been dominated in the class. These children's academic performance suffered, even with tasks that had been simple before. So right here, our author is giving us the results of the experiment or the side effects of this experiment. She's talking about how, here she is talking about how the brown-eyed children started off by saying that this wasn't fair, but she lied and said that blue eyes meant you were smarter. And once she said that and continued to treat the children differently, the blue-eyed children started to be bossy and mean to the brown-eyed children. They also improved their grades because she was telling them they were smarter and because she was telling them they were better. They actually started to rise above and meet her standards. While the brown-eyed children who were being told that they were not as smart and that they were not as good as their classmates started to get shy, they stopped talking, and they started acting as though they actually were inferior, even though there is no scientific proof that any type of intelligence has anything to do with eye color. There is no link there. The next Monday, Eliot reversed the exercise, making the brown-eyed children superior. While the brown-eyed children did taunt the blue-eyed children in similar ways to what occurred the previous, Eliot reports it was much less intense. At 2:30 on that Wednesday, Eliot told the blue-eyed children to take off their collars. To reflect on the experience, she asked the children to write down what they had learned. So this is she also turns the experiment around and has the brown-eyed children acting more superior to the blue-eyed children, and kind of talks about how their behaviors were very similar. So right now, what we're going to think about is our author's purpose for writing this, as well as how the author presents text information. So before I get to my chart with similarities and differences, somewhere on your sheet, I want us to write down what we might think our author's purpose is. So it doesn't have to be here, but somewhere we need to think our author's purpose is to inform readers about an experiment that Jane Elliott conducted on prejudice. So that's what our author wants us to understand, what this experiment was, what she did, and the results that she had. So not only to inform us about the experiment, but to give us details, results, and to reveal bias. The way that information is being presented is really very simply through an experiment. She gives us some background knowledge. Here she gives us background knowledge, but it's mostly this idea that it's through an experiment.